Can you hear me? Whoa.
Perfect, thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Committee of the Whole on April 16th. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 11 a.m. I would like to acknowledge that the City of Maple Ridge carries out its business on the traditional and unceded territories of the Katzie First Nation and the Kwantlen First Nation. Just before we move on to the agenda, I just have some words to share with the community, and you can see it'll be around Volunteer Week as the slide is up. So just so you know, this week from April 14th to 20th is National Volunteer Week. The theme this year is Every Moment Matters, which recognizes and celebrates volunteers and their contributions to strengthen inclusivity and well-being in our community. I know you've heard this many times from our mayor, and I think all of us share this, is our community is driven by our volunteers and their tireless efforts to make Maple Ridge a safer, healthier, and stronger city. You've also heard him say many times that we have the best volunteers in the nation, and I think all of us can agree with that we have some pretty spectacular volunteers in Maple Ridge. And we really want to thank every single one of you for all that you do to make a positive impact on our lives of others and being the backbone of our community. Volunteers are an essential part of the operation and culture of Maple Ridge. They provide a much needed support in recreational programming, crime prevention, environmental programs, festivals, emergency support services, youth services, and much, much more. Thousands of people also give their time and talents to raise money for charities, help school parent advisory councils, support youth and adult sports, arts groups, and support neighbors who need a helping hand. And we have seen that many times where there's been an incident or a community that is in need in our community, and volunteers step up right away to help people out. Coming up this weekend, April 22nd is Earth Day, but our city and the community is going to be celebrating this on April 20th. And part of that celebration, the city will be in the park, Memorial Peace Park, celebrating our volunteers and providing information about upcoming volunteer opportunities. Please stop by the city tent for a free treat and learn how you can get involved in some of the many events coming up. And so we have some really great, exciting things coming up, like the BC Summer Games and Maple Ridge 150th anniversary. And I have been involved on just a personal note in the BC Summer Games a couple of times before, and it truly is a very special event. And if you have the time, whether it's an hour or a day or weeks, please reach out. That is a great opportunity. On behalf of Mayor and Council, I do want to take a moment just to thank everyone in Maple Ridge who invests their time to make our community a better place. You inspire us each and every day. Happy National Volunteer Week, everyone. Thank you. Okay, so back to the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda as presented? It's been moved by Mayor Rumi, seconded by Councillor Tan. All those in favor? Opposed, carried. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes of April 2nd? It's been moved by Councillor Schiller, seconded by Councillor Youssef. Any errors or omissions in those minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor? All those in favor? Okay, opposed, carried. Okay, moving on to agenda item 5.1. And I forgot to hand it over to you. Do you have a little spiel you want to say before we get on? Yeah, we're good. It's being recorded. I think that's essentially what the community needs to know. I'll hand it over to Mark McCollum.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Committee. The application before you at 2022-229 VP is for the application at 11070 Lockwood Street, and the above noted address is on 112th Avenue, and the application is for a development variance permit. Sure, there you go. The existing OCP designation on the site is conservation, single family residential, suburban residential, and townhouse. And this has a rezoning application, OCP amendment application going forward concurrently, which would be considered by council next week at the council meeting on the 23rd. And that's to designate the site to make some adjustments to conservation park, single family residential, and townhouse. The existing zoning is RS3 single detached rural residential, and the proposed zones are listed on the screen, basically being RS1B, Single detached medium density residential with a density bonus to allow for R1 zoning provision as provided in the zoning bylaw. RS2 single detached suburban residential, RS3 single detached rural residential, and RM1 low density townhouse residential. The total site area is approximately 18.24 acres. This is a subject site on the cadastral map showing it bounded by Lockwood to the west and 112th Avenue to the north and 110th Avenue to the south. This is the subject site in its current condition as of last year, showing them being large rural residential lots, reflecting the existing zoning of the site. 2 water courses on it. As noted, this application is to be received in conjunction with the application to rezone the subject properties, which would include a future subdivision of 37 single-family lots and a townhouse project. Council will be considering this rezoning next week on the 23rd of April. There are a number of proposed lot dimension and building setback variances to the zoning bylaw proposed to support this 37 lot subdivision in accordance with the density provided in the Albion area plan. There are also several minor subdivision servicing bylaw variances as outlined below. So the application, I will just put these on the screen. I won't read everyone off. There's a number of lot width variances for the above noted lots, which will be on a subsequent plan to reduce the lot width under the proposed zoning going forward next week from 12 meters to between 11 meters and 12 meters. And then for a corner lot, which requires a 13.5 meter width to 13.14 meter width. And that lot depth, as noted on the screen for those 3 lots, noted on the screen, and then a rear yard setback, as noted above, from 6 meters to the distances noted on the presentation on the screen. There's also a variance to reduce the corner truncations or cuts for several corners in the subdivision for lots 17 and 34 from 5.5 by 5 meters to 3.3 by 3 meters to reduce the associated road dedications. And then to allow above ground existing utility poles on the south side of 112th Avenue to remain in place and not be converted to underground utilities at this time, and to allow for 1 double fronting lot and an exemption on lot frontage under the Local Government Act for the proposed lots 37, which is an irregular shaped lot, which I'll show on the subsequent screen. So just starting with lot 37, that is in the lower right-hand corner or southeast corner of the slide, showing that it's would be a lot that's having a covenant registered on it to allow for future development or subdivision of that lot when the lands to the east develop at some time. So it's an irregular lot that's basically fronting on 110th Avenue to the south, and then sort of panhandling up to the new road shown on the screen. So the variance is needed because it's double fronting and the frontage doesn't meet the normal requirements at this time until it's subdivided of 10% frontage on a road. And the other lots being varied on the depth are, I don't have all of them right on the screen, but they tend to be the lots on the lower part, the lot depths are on the Lockwood side of the presentation panel. Those lots are shallower than the normal 27 meter depth that's required. And then the lots along 110th Avenue to the south are going to be slightly narrower than the lots width is normally required. And this is due largely to the large amount of park dedication that's provided on the site that you see on the screen, which occupies a large amount of the site and has led to some irregularly shaped lots. So the recommendation here before you is that this corporate officer be authorized to sign and seal the variance permit respecting the above noted properties after the next council meeting, should council approve the variance. Madam Chair and committee.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to move this to council next week? It's been moved by Councillor Youssef, seconded by Mayor Rumi. Anyone wish to ask questions on this? Councillor Schiller.
Thank you, Chair. You answered one of my questions already. Thank you. That was about the double frontage exemption. But I just wanted to ask a question around the provincial changes that are coming towards us.
Right.
So this project is moving ahead, and we're going to give, final reading will be before council next week to subdivide this into 37 parcels for a
Mhm.
37 single-family home development. If things were to change and legislation changes or ownership and desires were to further densify that lot, can you just explain to me how this project would come back to council? Like, would it start right from the beginning of the process, or do we have clarity around that?
Madam Chair, through Councillor Schiller. So the provincial government is mandating that local governments change their zoning bylaws to allow for multiple units on lots over 280 square meters. And all these lots are over 280 square meters, as are many thousands of lots in the city. So with the change in that zoning, an owner may, as with these lots or other lots, apply under the new zoning that province is requiring us to adopt to allow for several dwelling units on each of these lots. There would have to be, if that were to happen, and it's unlikely to happen, there'd have to be changes, of course, to service and connections and other considerations with respect to coverage of the lot and impervious surfaces. But that would be a change that could affect the subdivision and many other lots throughout the city.
So if I'm following you, then if there was a desire to go to that higher level of density, the project would have to come back for consideration again?
No. So just the subdivision, or as I said, thousands of lots throughout the city, when the city makes its required changes, that's the province requiring, then there would be no rezoning to allow for the multiple units on each lot. That's the provincial direction to local governments throughout the province.
Okay, thank you. Just working to understand those future implications. Seemed like a good opportunity. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Any other questions around the table? Perfect. So just on Councillor Schiller's. So I just want to be clear. So with the new legislation, the city controls the lot size. We would need to approve like the subdivision, which is the lot size.
Right.
But what they do on that lot does not come to council. If it's within the legislation.
The city will control it to the extent that it can, and that, so this application will be creating lots that are over 280 square meters. And the city is required by the province to change its zoning bylaw throughout the city to allow for multiple units on each lot and different combinations of suites and detached garden suites on these size of lots. So the council will be a report will be brought forward in zoning amending bylaws to allow that higher density, multiple units on these lots and throughout the city. And after that's done, in accordance with provincial legislation, there would be no more council input on this or other lots having multiple units. They'd be allowed in the zoning.
But we still would be in control of the subdivision and the lot size going forward.
Should council approve the zoning next week, then at that time, the zoning is set for the lot size next week. It would be zoned, and then it would just be a subdivision plan that's being approved by the approving officer of the city. Okay. So there's no further change to lot size after that point.
Okay, thanks. It's been moved in. Oh, Mayor Rumi.
Oh, wow. So just looking at the beginning with there's a lot of variances that are there. Is that due to the actual park? Is that why we're looking for variances? That the way that the park is shaped up?
Madam Chair, through to Mayor Rumi, that is substantially the reason. As the park as a development plan went through the process, the environmental reports and geotechnical reports determined that the park would be that large part of the site, and a number of the lots, particularly on Lockwood, ended up being shorter due to the park, and then lots on the south side were longer because the park, there was nowhere else to put any further lots on the south side. So it's an irregular natural feature and led to some irregularly shaped lots.
And no, and that's good that the park is taking precedence over that. How will those variances affect the actual size of the affected lots?
Madam Chair, to Mayor Rumi, all the lots still have to meet the actual area requirements of 371 square meters. So they have to meet the area. We can't vary area, just the dimensions, depth or width.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. It has been moved and seconded to move it to council next week. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Moving on to 5.2, 2021-131 VP, so 23103 136 Avenue Development Variance Permit. And I believe it's Mark Mullen again.
Yes.
We get you all day, I think.
Yes.
Perfect, over to you.
Madam Chair, for the above noted application at 23103 136 Avenue, it's a development variance permit for subdivision and rezoning that's in process. The site is now designated civic and conservation. It's proposed to be amended to medium density residential. The application is at third reading and is proposed to be considered by council next Tuesday, the 23rd, along with the other application previously discussed. The current zoning is A2 upland agricultural. The proposed zoning is R2 single detached medium density urban residential, and the site area is 2.85 acres. This is a subject property on the cadastral map. This is subject property here on the ortho photo showing the built environment and the natural state of this lot. I should note that this application is being received in conjunction with a 20 lot subdivision application and rezoning based on the R2 zoning. Council will be considering this zoning as noted on the 23rd of April next week. In just a little bit of background, in 2012, the school district made a decision not to acquire the site for school development, thereby allowing a portion of the phase 2 site. This is phase 2 of a larger development that had commenced in the west to be developed as single family lots, as it was not required for the school site development. And that application had gone through a number of years ago and has similar R2 sized lots. And this application's lots are a similar size as those lots to the west on the west side of 230A Street. So the variances, somewhat similar to the other, are not as many, but for the proposed lots 1 to 3, 9 to 16, 8 and 18 to reduce the width from 11 meters to 10.5 meters, and to reduce the lot depth or widths on lots 19 to 20 from 11 meters to 9.5 meters, and then reduce the lot depth on an irregularly shaped proposed lot 18, which you'll see on the next plan, from 27 to 3.9 meters, and this is due to the irregular shape. There's a building envelope that's well sized, but there's a remnant that is attached to the lot, which technically requires this variance. And so this is the layout of the subdivision showing the lots with the proposed variances with the arrows on them, with the lot variances all being from 11 to 10.5 on the west side of the site and 230th A on the center row of lots, and then down to 9.5 meters for the two lots in the corner, 19 and 20, and then 18.5 for, 10.5 for lot 18, the main part of which is shown in that corner. And then lot 18 then has this long remainder portion that traverses down the east side of the site. And the lot depth is measured at the midpoint of a lot, and lot 18 is that larger part. And then the long dog leg, I could call it, it's 3.9 meters at that point. So that's the technical variance for that remainder. And that lot remainder is then secured with a covenant through the subdivision and rezoning to ensure that it's not built on, it can't be built on, and that it could then be amalgamated into a future subdivision of the lot to the east. And that's somewhat like what was done in the previous application with Epic Homes. It was a lot 37, had a remnant lot. It wasn't as unusual shaped as this, but that it's not to be built on the part that's to be amalgamated to an adjacent lot to the east in this case and in the previous case. And you can see a very conceptual lot layout for the lands to the east, which would have to be proved out if this application came forward. And so the recommendations are the corporate officer be authorized to sign and seal development variance permit 2021-131 VP respecting the site at 23103 136 Avenue. Madam Chair and Committee.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to move this to council next week? Moved by Councillor Duick, seconded by Councillor Youssef. Any questions on this one? Not seeing any questions. Are those in favor of moving it to next week? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. Moving on to 5.3, 2023-208 RZ 12035 Glenhurst Street. Go ahead, please.
Madam Chair and Committee, this application here is being considered for second reading of zone amending bylaw 7958 2023. The site is designated urban residential. The current zoning is RS1 single detached residential, and the proposed zoning is R4 single detached infill urban residential. The existing site area is approximately 0.929 acres, and 2 lots are proposed. This is the subject map, just showing it on the cadastral map, and with Glenhurst Street to the east. This is showing the built environment of the existing area and this large double lot here that's subject to the application. And this is the lot on the official community plan map, showing it as urban residential. So as noted, an application to be received to rezone this lot from RS1 to R4, single detached infill residential, to permit subdivision of 2 lots. The lots would be accessed off Glenhurst Street. An existing single family dwelling is required to be removed. It's a requirement of the rezoning. This application is compliant with the OCP, which allows for the R4 zoning. And if the application were to proceed to completion and adoption by council, there'd be a $9,200 community amenity charge applicable. And this is the proposed lots here, showing lot A at 509 square meters, which is quite a bit above the 450 square meter minimum lot size. And then the lot B to the north of being 624 meters. And that lot is larger, largely due to the statutory right-of-way for storm services. That's 4 meters on the north. So the lot had to be larger than this other one to allow for an adequate building envelope. And then here are the terms and conditions, which I won't read in detail because they're quite long, and they're on the screen for you and in the report. There's a rezoning servicing requirement required to be registered as a covenant and receipt of the security as typical for all such rezonings. Road dedication of 1.5 meters on Glenhurst Street, widen the road allowance, a stormwater management covenant, removal of the existing building, and just confirmation through the Ministry of Environment contaminate site profile process, a standard process that they rezoning cannot proceed unless there is some clearance that it is not contaminated site, and there's no indication that it is. It's a standard just requirement. And then also another standard requirement where, in addition to the site disclosure statement with the contaminated sites regulation, the city requires a professional engineer to confirm there's no underground fuel storage tanks that might be a hazard. And if so, there's some indication we need a stage 1 environmental investigation report to confirm that it's not a contaminated site through a former underground fuel storage tank. And then the last community amenity contribution of $9,200 as previously noted. Madam Chair, Committee.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to move this to the next council? Moved by Councillor Youssef, seconded by Councillor Tan. Any questions on this one? Not seeing any questions. Okay, all those in favor? Opposed, carried. Great, thank you very much. Okay, moving on to 8.1, the engagement phase 1 report on the recreation feasibility study. So I believe we have our manager of special projects coming up. And as our director of parks and facilities, or is it all you today?
I'm just going to introduce
Okay.
and give a quick intro, and we'll have our
Perfect.
consultants lead us through.
I think we're all looking forward to this.
Good,
Exciting moving
good.
forward.
Fun information to share. So good morning, Madam Chair and Council. Today's staff and our consultants are here to provide an overview of the results of the first phase of public engagement on the recreation facility feasibility study. So the feasibility study kicked off in the fall of 2023 with the award of contract to HCMA Architecture and Design. The study is intended to determine the feasibility of a new multi-use recreation facility at the preferred site, which is Hammond Community Park. Along with extensive engagement, the project will include geotechnical and archaeological assessments, a transportation traffic impact analysis, and an understanding of present and future service demand levels, all of which will inform the development of a few design concepts for consideration. So HCMA, along with engagement partners, the Cornerstone Planning Group, developed and facilitated the public engagement plan that rolled out from January to March of this year. This engagement phase is one of 2 engagements that will occur throughout the length of the project and is critical to understand the community's needs and desires for a new aquatics and arena facility. So today we have here Kim Winston, who is Director of Community Projects with HCMA, and Quentin Talbot Kelly, who is with Cornerstone Planning Group. I'll welcome Quentin up to the podium to start his presentation.
Hello, Madam Chair and Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present the results of the Phase 1 engagement. My name is Quentin Talbot Kelly. I'm a partner at Cornerstone Planning Group, and as Krista noted, we are the consultant that's been hired to perform the Phase 1 engagement, and we're also doing the service demands analysis, which follows this piece. We're sub-consultants to HCMA, represented by Kim today. So today we have a few different items to go over. There's a few slides just on basic project context. Some of that information has already been covered by Krista, so we will be fairly brief. And then we get into the engagement. So overall, the scope, the activities completed, and the key themes that we pulled from all of the engagement that was completed, both quantitative and qualitative. And then lastly, we'll wrap up with next steps as to how this information is going to be used going forward. So just as a reminder, this feasibility or this Phase 1 engagement study is really just part of the recreation feasibility study. That recreation feasibility study has sort of 6 main goals. 1, to assess the current state of recreation within the city. 2nd, to estimate the future demand for recreation, with particular focus on arenas and aquatics, but obviously looking at the larger recreation landscape as well. 3rd, to quantify the facility and site requirements to meet those demands. 4th, to assess the suitability of the preferred site location, which we know is the Hammond Community Park. 5th, to explore the site and facility concept designs. And then lastly, to make a recommendation for the most beneficial path forward. So that's the larger study. That larger study has been broken down into 7 key phases of work over an 8-month period. We are about halfway through the process. So we've completed the engagement for Phase 1. We've done a large portion of the existing site and service demand analysis, and we're working on currently the facility program recommendations. And so, as Krista had noted, there's a number of other sort of assessments ongoing as part of this process as well. So geotechnical and archaeological studies, transportation analysis, and of course, the site concept designs will follow the facility program recommendations. We expect this project to be completed in fall of this year. We also are hoping to go back to the community with the results of all of the analysis that's taken place since the first engagement in January to March in June. So there'll be another round of public engagement, similar to what was sort of experienced in the first phase, but that'll take place in June. And so the goal of the engagement that has just been completed was twofold. 1, to gather insights from the community's current use patterns of recreation facilities, as well as identifying any sort of gaps or challenges that may exist. 2nd was to obtain information on their preferences and priorities for future program spaces. And so the engagement has really been focused on recreation activities and facility spaces, and not at all on sort of the proposed location or other aspects. Obviously, there's a number of different things that go into the feasibility of a project like this, but this engagement focused on recreation activities, needs, and desires. And so extensive engagement has been completed, and I'll compare it to a few other projects after going through some of the initial activities that were completed. So 3 surveys were part of this process. The first survey was the general public survey, which we had about 2,400 or 2,350 responses from the community members, which was a very good turnout. And again, this survey focused on the current use patterns of the community, as well as where they saw gaps and opportunities for future. It did not focus on the proposed site location or any other sort of site-specific components, but of course there was also an open-ended question where a lot of that information still was captured. And so I'll comment on that once we go through some of the key themes. The other 2 surveys that were developed were targeted surveys, and these were targeted, 1 for recreation user groups, and so people that, or groups I should say, that currently use the recreation spaces within Maple Ridge. And the second one was for community organizations, which weren't necessarily related to recreation specifically, but what I like to call recreation adjacent. And so they're organizations that benefit from or make use of community or recreation types of spaces. So people that would rent multi-purpose spaces or have some sort of an influence on the overall clientele that recreation typically serves. The next engagement activity were open houses, and so 4 different open houses were completed. 3 of them were open to the public, so they were held at Maple Ridge Public Library, Maple Ridge Leisure Center, and then lastly Planet Ice. There was also 1 additional open house completed, which was at the Hammond Community Center, and this one was specifically targeted for the Hammond community neighborhood. And so this was invite only, and of course, a slightly different demographic of folks showed up for that session. The last type of engagement activity that was completed were interviews and workshops, and so 17 different sessions were held. This included community, rental user groups, and specific city department sessions. In terms of the overall engagement and what was completed, I would say this is a very, very involved and engaged community. Just looking at the public survey alone, about 2,400 responses, which was actually one of the largest responses that we've seen for a project of this scale. In terms of comparators, we have done a similar analysis for the city of Abbotsford for their arena strategy, which we had a public survey, which was in similar vein. That garnered about 600 responses. And if we look at some of the larger municipalities in Metro Vancouver, so City of Vancouver, they completed an aquatic strategy a number of years ago, what had extensive engagement through that process, and that was about 4,500 responses. And so actually for a percentage of your population, this survey was quite a bit more successful than some of the larger initiatives across the Lower Mainland. The second thing to note here is just around open houses. And so a lot of the open house session itself was to gather qualitative information, but we're also able to get some quantitative. And so all of the stickies that were left on all the boards, as well as some of the exercises, we pulled some data from that. But in total, there was about 650 collected comments through that process. And so why it was so successful was that there was a lot of effort put into the marketing of this campaign. And so you can see here with the list of different marketing activities that quite a lot was done. There was a landing page developed on your Engage Maple Ridge page, which is fairly standard, I think, for these processes. But in addition to that, we had postcard mailouts, newspaper ads, pop-up banners and facilities, digital TV screen promotion, social media campaigns, Facebook events. The mayor had a number of videos that were put forward as well as digital paid ads. So there was considerable effort to make sure that this was a widely participated in process, one, to inform the community, as well as to collect some feedback as to how they'd like to see it shape the future recreation facility. Here's just a couple of pictures. These are all from the open houses. So the one on the top left side, that was from the public library, and you can see on the bottom middle, that was from Planet Ice, and then on the right side, you can see the open house session at Hammond Community Center. The Hammond Community Center open house was attended by 132 different local residents. That was the only one where we tracked participation, so we can't comment on the others, but very well attended. So when we start to look at some of the results, what we can see here first is that in terms of who responded to the survey, 95% of the public survey responses were from Maple Ridge residents, which is a good indication that the information is fairly relevant to the clientele that we're focusing on. The second thing that's worth noting is that the density of population across Maple Ridge and the number of participants by their identified postal code is actually roughly in line, so a very proportional response rate. So for example, in the V2X on the west side of Maple Ridge, you can see that total area makes up about 55% of the total population of Maple Ridge. And we had about 54% of the responses were from that catchment area. So it's actually very proportional, which is not typically what we see, but this is a nice finding from the data. So in terms of themes, we've tried to summarize the information to the most digestible amount possible, as well as the most relevant to what will inform the next pieces of work. And so we've categorized the themes into 4 key areas: aquatics, arenas, general recreation, and then sort of an other bucket. And so there's a lot of detail, obviously, behind all of these different sections and categories, and happy to discuss that after. But right now, we're really commenting on the findings from the general public survey, which was the largest quantitative data set that we had. So from that information, we saw that in terms of current use of aquatic spaces, we can see that the majority of the participants, 67%, identified that they frequently participate in drop-in swimming activities. 40% said swimming lessons, and 34% were visiting the aquatic infrastructure, so the leisure center for amenities, saunas, steam rooms, hot tub. And so what this really says is that the current use profile right now is there's a large presence of leisure water users in comparison to potentially some competitive uses. When we asked them specifically to identify how they'd like to use a new aquatic facility in the future, there was a number of different categories that they could choose from. These were the top three, so leisure and recreation, swim lessons, and then rehabilitation needs. Again, key outcome of this finding is really that the community is looking for additional leisure and recreation water, and less so with a focus of competitive water. There's a key distinction between leisure and competitive, depending on water depths, water temperatures, et cetera, and it also completely different changes the shape of a future aquatic facility. So very key in the early phases to identify how the water will be used going forward. In terms of aquatic amenities, this was sort of a long list that people had an opportunity to weigh in on as to what they'd like to see there in terms of top priorities. And so a new facility, they'd like to see the inclusion of hot tubs, a lazy river, water slides, and also an outdoor aquatic amenity. So I'd say the first three are fairly standard, what we'd expect to see from a community of this size and demographic. The fourth one, which is the outdoor aquatic amenity, I think that's in response to the fact that this potential development could replace or change the current use of Hammond Community Park, which has an outdoor water feature. And so I think this is likely as a result of the physical location, but also speaks to the demand from the community where there is this indoor and outdoor aquatic amenity that is starting to creep up in the Lower Mainland and is a quite popular trend across, like I said, across the Lower Mainland. Okay, so in terms of arenas, the current use profile for the participants that responded to the survey were about 51% of them participate in public skating. So that's the leisure activities. 32% were registered or ice hockey participants. And then lastly, 23% leisure focus again were skate lesson participants. And so this is more of a typical distribution as we'd expect for most arenas, is that there's a larger percentage of the populations using it for leisure, and then there is a smaller subset, but still quite prominent, that are using it for sport activities, in this case, ice hockey. So the most consistent theme across all of the engagements that's completed, surveys, as well as all of the open houses and information sessions, was that there's insufficient amount of prime time ice and dry floor available to meet the existing demand. And so this is just speaking to the availability of number of ice sheets. And so this was consistent across training, competition, and community programs. The last thing that we're going to comment on in terms of arenas is that the top requested priorities. So the community would like to see increased access for drop-in and leisure skating. Again, speaking to sort of the leisure focus. Second is that they'd like to see the inclusion of a walking track. And so this is something that a lot of the new facilities are including. So a walking track around the perimeter, usually elevated around the perimeter of an ice surface. And so this is consistent again with this community. And then lastly, they identified the need for improved support areas. And in this case, that included seating areas, concessions, change rooms, multi-purpose spaces, and meeting rooms. This is likely a direct result of the fact that the existing infrastructure at Planet Ice is fairly dated, and there's lots of opportunities for improvement there. In terms of general recreation, we also asked the community to comment on what other types of recreation spaces they'd like to see as part of the development that would include potentially ice and aquatics. And 31% of respondents, and sort of the largest perceived shortage of general recreation space, was identified to be fitness related. And so this is weights and cardio. And so for sure, a new facility should include a fitness and cardio space. Additional to that, like I mentioned, indoor walking track was a top priority for the community. Climbing walls, children's play spaces, and youth focus spaces were all identified as potential activities that should be included as part of a new recreation center. And this other slide, so this is interesting. So obviously we didn't specifically target asking residents about the proposed location or potentially if they were in support or not in support of this overall initiative. But of course, with an open-ended comment box, there's an opportunity for anybody to share whatever they feel like. And so there are some key trends here. So we analyzed all of the data, which was thousands of responses. And what we can see here are the top 3 themes. And so the first one that I think is worth noting is that roughly 700 of the 2,300 respondents indicated that there was an overall enthusiasm for a new recreation facility. And so again, not prompted, but captured in the data. So there is support within the community for new recreation. The second thing that's worth noting is that there was about 11% or about 257 respondents that had identified a direct concern with the loss of the baseball diamonds as a result of this development. And so Hammond Community Park, as you know, has 2 baseball diamonds, and there's significant concerns around the loss of those diamonds. Going one step further, when we looked into the actual qualitative responses, there was a few different categories that sort of jumped out as to what the loss of the baseball diamonds actually meant. One, just not knowing where the next location or the replacement fields were going to take place. That was a significant concern. There was also concerns or some sort of pushback from the community that they didn't feel that even if it was identified as a location, that it would actually happen. And then the third, I think, probably largest concern was around the types of baseball diamonds, its physical location, and ensuring that those baseball diamonds are developed in advance of any changes to this existing site. And so really putting a strong sort of emphasis on the continuation of baseball, knowing that those 2 fields specifically provide baseball opportunities for a specific age group. And so they would need to be replaced before anything else takes place. The last thing worth noting was that 7% of the overall respondents just expressed a direct opposition to the proposed site. And so, again, going a little bit further into that, a lot of these respondents felt that the location should be further in the east, or it didn't align with the existing neighborhood look and feel, traffic concerns, parking issues, loss of green space, or just the physical location, like I said. So there was a number of those, but that made up only about 7% of the total respondents from the public survey. So just in complete summary, I think in terms of aquatics, there should be, for the future recreation facility, there should be a focus on leisure. Again, there are needs for the competitive user groups, but those needs are represented by far fewer people. And so the water design should consider a more leisure-focused approach rather than competition. The second thing in terms of arenas is that the largest concern that we heard across the survey, as well as all the user groups and the qualitative feedback, was that it's really to do with the availability of ice more than anything else. And so there is a shortfall of ice, and I'm sure you've heard this before within Maple Ridge. And so as part of this next stage, the service demand analysis, we'll be able to quantify how many additional ice sheets are required. But we do also know that the public has that same perception that there's a shortage. When we look at general recreation, again, a new facility should definitely include a fitness space, likely should include a indoor walking track, and then additional amenities like climbing walls or children's play spaces and youth focus spaces. And then just lastly to say that there is support for this development. 30%, even though not prompted, made note of it. But there are some concerns. 11% direct opposition 11% identified the concern with the loss of baseball, and then 7% in terms of direct opposition for the proposed site. So in terms of next steps, like I mentioned, this work will inform the service demand analysis. That piece of work is largely completed, and so we've taken the results or the outcomes from the engagement process, as well as a number of other sort of data places to identify what the future demand actually is for aquatics in terms of physical volume of water, number of ice sheets, and then physical space associated to those support recreation spaces. So gyms, fitness areas, courts, that sort of thing. And so that's the service demand analysis. Once that's identified in terms of what the future demand is over the next 20 years, then we put that into a facility program. The facility program will lay out sort of the key components of the building, which will then inform the test fit exercise that HCMA will be performing. At that same time, as you know, there's a number of assessments. So the archaeological and geotechnical analysis, as well as this traffic impact, that's also being done. And the goal is to present back all of the results of everything past the phase 1 engagement as part of the phase 2 in June. And so I will pause there. I think this is the end of the presentation for any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you very much for your presentation and your work on this thus far. It's a really exciting project for the community. Can I get a motion to move this forward to the next council meeting? Moved by Mayor Rumi, seconded by Councillor Tan. I imagine there'll be lots of questions on this, so I'll take anybody have questions? I can write down a list. Okay, I have Councillor Tan. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, thank you to staff as well and to our consultant. It's really wonderful to see. I think when I hear you talk about the engagement survey and I see the results on this, I saw it as something that was we really made an effort here. We really made an effort to be genuinely inclusive and to really hear the voices of lots of people. And I really appreciate it, both from the number of responses we've seen, the types of open houses we had, the stakeholder sessions. And we also heard a lot of things about we didn't ask about just a pool, we made that broader and we asked it about what kinds of recreation facilities we wanted the community to see and how does this fit into our city's largest strategic goals. So I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and the broadness around this. I also appreciate it.
Sorry, I'm just sorry because we're in committee of the whole and it's
Oh my
questions.
gosh, I'm
I
so
know
sorry.
it's so hard to do it, but I'm going to have to move you
I'm
towards
so
the question.
sorry, Madam Chair. Thank you. Well, please take my appreciation and I'll leave it there. And then in terms of, I think I wanted to ask about the outdoor aquatic amenity. I was curious maybe you could flesh out a little bit about that. What sort of, what did we hear? I think the reason why I'm curious is I love outdoor pools. I'm curious about both the combination of the indoor and the outdoor pool at the facility.
Yep, through Madam Chair to Councillor Tan. So in response to that question, I think so there was a bit of a mixture. So there were people that identified that they would like to see a splash pad or spray park as part of this development. And so speaking to obviously increasing temperatures across the entire Lower Mainland, just access to outdoor water in peak summer months. And then there was also a large group of respondents that identified the need for the replacement of the outdoor pool because it is such a valued asset. And so again, that's for peak summer months where you do want to spend time outside rather than indoors. And I think the last thing just to comment on is that what we see in some of the other communities is that they are developing sort of the indoor aquatic amenity with the ability to break out into the outdoor spaces. And so Port Coquitlam comes to mind right now, where they actually have their pool with a splash pad directly adjacent. Why that's really beneficial is that from an operational standpoint, the cost to operate that facility is quite a bit more efficient than two separate facilities. But it also just provides the community access to the outdoor space when people want to have access to outdoor space. And so it's I would say a fairly constant theme and trend across aquatic planning.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And so just to make sure I understand, I hear that there's a spray park concept and what we have at Haven now is of course a more traditional sort of pool. And so when I hear outdoor aquatic amenity, I'm almost hearing a breakdown to two different categories. One is more like a spray park and one is sort of a splash pad. And splash pad, I'm going to assume is something kind of like for toddlers to kind of play in, or is it sort of more similar to what?
Spray park, splash pad, I would say put in the same category.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. So
yeah.
it's like kind of just like a top down, like
Yeah.
water feature for kids
Yeah.
to run around.
Or from the bottom. up.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, that's what we mean by outdoor aquatic amenities. So I appreciate that. And I'm curious what we heard about, whether we heard anything about sort of the need for outdoor and indoor gathering spaces. I know that it's a very popular outdoor gathering space right now. And I mean, not necessarily for an organized sport, but just sort of recreational, just hang out with neighbors kind of thing.
Yeah. Through Madam Chair to Councillor Tan. So yes, we actually heard quite a bit in our qualitative. So I'd say through the conversations that we had at open houses, as well as through the information, the workshops and planning sessions, is that the need for that outdoor space, for gathering space, for programs as well to take place outside is in a high demand. Topics were brought up, sort of like covered program spaces that could be provided. Opportunities for gathering outside for small events, birthday parties, that sort of thing. Again, the function of the existing Hammond Community Center, which sort of was a catch-all for some of those types of activities, was consistent through our engagement, where people said they would like to see that type of activity included, but also provide outdoor space opportunities for those types of events and engagements.
Wonderful. Thank you. I think I'll stop here, pause here. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions. I do have a couple of questions. One just sort of off of Councillor Tan. This seemed very recreation based. It's Parks, Recreation and Culture. I'm wondering if we did, and it doesn't look like we did any outreach to like the Arts Council or Garibaldi Art Club or the Multicultural Society. And I'm wondering if we're going to have more of a wider sort of catch when we go into the next stage, because I think that any recreation, we have Parks, Recreation and Culture together for a reason. And to not ask about culture and involve arts and multicultural societies is a huge loss, I think, going forward.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In response to that, so as part of our targeted surveys, the community organization groups, we did reach out to a number of sort of what I was calling recreation adjacent. So the groups that you're talking to, so the cultural focus groups. So we have got some feedback from those groups already. But I do think, like you're identifying, is that they're potentially a little bit underrepresented as part of this first phase. So we had one-on-one discussions with a number of multicultural groups, as well as they had a targeted survey. But just looking at the overall numbers in responses that we had from those specific activities, I do think you're right in saying it's a little bit underrepresented at this point. And so as part of our work, we're looking at overall general recreation and community space trends. And so we will be applying some general trends that we have sort of Canada-wide as well as local to a facility of this type. And so there definitely will be some inclusion for spaces for arts and culture. But I would say your assessment's fair in that it's underrepresented currently.
Thank you. The arts are my heart, as you can tell. Yeah, and I think it's also really important as we go into the next stage that we just involve youth organizations as well for youth space. So I'm glad to hear that. I have another question. Going through this, I heard, I guess, a real sort of negative around competitive swimming, but I didn't hear the same negativity around hockey, or we weren't talking about soccer, but when we do fields. And so my question is, why is competitive swimming, which is youth-based and important at a recreation and competitive level, why do we not treat it the same as hockey, which is also recreational and a higher competitive? And again, like this didn't talk, when we go about fields, we never say, well, we shouldn't talk about competitive soccer. So I'm just curious why we wouldn't consider competitive swimming at the same level. I understand maybe not as many people are participating in it at this time because we actually don't have the facilities to support it properly, but how do you balance that out?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So great question. And I would say you've sort of hit one of the points right on the head, which was that the number of participants typically in competitive swimming versus hockey, competitive hockey is not in the same place. I would say that's an overall trend across all municipalities, not just Maple Ridge, in the fact that you don't have the facilities to support it. The second thing that I think is worth noting is that when you're thinking about the actual infrastructure to support competitive swimming, it's fairly extensive. So typically what competitive swimming wants to see is a 50-meter pool. 50-meter pool generally comes with increased depth as well as colder water temperatures. And the actual use of that water decreases quite drastically when you look at sort of how that water is going to be used. So for the volume of water, you'll see way less participation now and into the future just because of the water depth and temperature. And so I think we don't want to necessarily say that the needs of recreation or competitive swimming cannot be met here. But what we did take away from the survey and the engagement is that the need for a 50 meters pool specifically to support competition is not what the general community thinks they need. And that's just to do with pure numbers of participants. How we've approached this in some of our other studies is that although it's not ideal, 50-meter pools can be thought of as a regional asset rather than a local asset, because the use of that water is quite a bit less than any sort of leisure-focused water.
But we can still build a 25-meter pool that's competitive because it has
Oh, for
the
sure.
right and number of lanes, which ours currently doesn't.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just clarify that is that there's definitely opportunities within a leisure-focused aquatic amenity to include a 25-meter pool for sure that can support competition. And it's really just looking at that that additional 25 meters, the 50 meters, which makes it very hard to program long term, unless it becomes a real focus of the community to provide and support and sort of foster that growth for competition in swimming.
Thank you. Councillor Youssef.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the consultant for the information provided thus far. I have a few questions concerning the engagement itself. These were all done through, as you mentioned, the actual physical interaction of people coming in. Was there any consideration given to online, especially and specifically social media posts and community groups that have come about as a result of the proposal?
Through Madam Chair to Councillor Youssef. So yeah, social media was a big part of this. I wouldn't say that we've mined any data from any social media. So specific Facebook pages, for example, that I know have popped up as a result of this process. Speaking of sort of like the online engagement piece, 38,000 unique views as part of this process. That's about 2,100 link clicks and overall 90,000 impressions. So I do think there was a large component that was likely related to social media that we did not capture in terms of our analysis. That being said, we have looked at some of the Facebook groups, for example, that exist as a result of this development, and I would say the themes that we see there are very consistent to what we've captured here. I think there's subsets of groups within the community that have specific themes. So, for example, like the Hammond community residents, we know that they have a slightly different list of priorities and concerns related to this development, and I'm happy to share what we've learned through that process. But there was nothing that we saw on the online social media, Facebook groups that we don't have captured through this process in terms of overall themes, but we don't have quantitative data.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies because there has been a significant amount of social media groups and group chats and pages that have developed as such. And you are correct in that it's not reflective of what you're seeing. It's just the quantity of responses. Follow-on question, if I may, through you, Madam Chair. When it comes to the feedback from the engagement that you've been receiving, has the public had any input or ideas for alternate locations outside of the Hammond Stadium? As you mentioned, the baseball community is quite adamant about those diamonds. So have they come forward to us with any alternate locations?
Through Madam Chair to Councillor Youssef, I would just say there were probably two large buckets of not this location. Why don't you consider the land available adjacent to Planet Ice? So that was one. The second one, and obviously we know there's challenges with that property, and so it's not actually suitable for an aquatic amenity. The second one was it should be located in the east, and so anywhere in the east. All the development is taking place in the east, and so they felt as a whole, and I'd say fairly consistent across the participants of the open houses to start, that the location should be further east. Specific sites were identified, but there was no real theme around a specific site that's worth noting.
Interesting, very interesting. Couple more questions, if I may, Madam Chair. When we're looking at these proposed sites, as you mentioned, the Planet Ice, of course, has its challenges somewhere to the east. Have you, through this process, considered looking at locations that are available through the municipality or possibly that could be made available in the future?
Through Madam Chair to Councillor Youssef, we have not. So it was made pretty clear throughout early on in our process that this was not the focus of our engagement. And so that process, I'm sure you're aware, was undertaken by the city staff, where they had gone through all of the available city-owned properties and then done a ranking criteria and prioritization exercise, which led to Hammond Community Park being the top preferred site option.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure that we stay clear to the sort of feedback that we're getting, because that was sort of the parameters that this was done in.
Understood. Just again, questioning whether that was a consideration or not.
Yeah, it was
And
fine to
last
ask about
question.
feedback, just other sites is something that this organization wasn't tasked with looking into.
And my last question through you, Madam Chair, possibly to staff, is when we're moving forward with this proposal, are there any plans to retain the diamonds that have been, of course, mentioned in conjunction with the redevelopment of the property?
So again, I just want to, this is about the assessment piece. Once we get through the assessment piece, then we'll be able to look at the other pieces. I just want to make sure that I'm
Sorry, you mean
accurate.
engagement or assessment?
The engagement piece.
Right.
Yeah, so if we can just stick to the engagement piece, and I think we need to get through the feasibility piece first on this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Councillor Tan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just on my next round of questions, I was just looking through the list of participating stakeholders for the targeted stakeholder interviews, and I was wondering if we had an opportunity to reach out to the groups that represent Indigenous populations in our community, or if there's a plan for this in the next engagement phase.
Yeah, through Madam Chair to Councillor Tan, thank you for that. So as part of our process, engagement with the Indigenous communities were identified very early on in the process, and so we have reached out in a number of attempts to engage with them. We've done that in many different ways. We tried to engage with them, and now we're just waiting for them to want to be part of this process. And so we will continue to reach out to those First Nations, try to get their participation. But as far as up until this point, they have not indicated that they want to be a part of this process. And there may be further updates from staff that you want to comment on, and maybe I'll just provide a pause there. Is there anything else that you wanted to say? Okay. Okay.
Thank you for that effort. Yeah. I appreciate that. And also in addition to the nations, which are incredibly important, there's also, as you and as staff are well aware, societies and organizations, community organizations in our community that represent urban Indigenous populations and Inuit populations. And it would be wonderful to have a next time that you come back to council to give us an update of where that is. And as we all know, organizations and nations are incredibly busy. So when folks have a capacity, we of course appreciate that participation. I saw also that the Gragmore Youth Center participants were represented on this targeted stakeholder list, which I was delighted to see. And I'm wondering if there's a plan to expand that engagement to other youth groups in our community. There are, Kiwanis groups, there are local youth councils. If we can sort of, if staff and yourself are able to sort of give us a sense of what those youth groups are thinking as well, that would be incredibly important.
Yeah, through Madam Chair to Councillor Tan. Yeah, we will definitely make that a note, and we will come back to you as part of phase 2 to say with a larger group of youth specific groups that we'll engage with.
Wonderful. Youth and children are such a great part.
Thank you.
So I'm understanding that. Okay, that we'll look at that next time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Just one last quick question, just on the Indigenous piece. I just want to make sure that Friss and GEMS are on that list in addition to Katzie First Nation and Kwantlen First Nation. I'm getting a nod, so okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. It's been moved and seconded to forward this to our next council meeting. All those in favor? Opposed, carried. Great, thank you. And thank you very much for your work on this.
Thank you.
Much appreciated. Okay, moving down to community forum. Do you have a little spiel you'd like? I remember this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Next item is item 10, community forum. Participants in the community forum are reminded that there should be no discussion of public hearing bylaws which have not yet reached conclusion. Each speaker will have 2 minutes to speak to council. A second opportunity may be provided once all speakers in the queue have had an opportunity to speak. The total time allotted for community forum is 15 minutes. If you wish to acquire about additional opportunities to address council, please contact the corporate officer. Members of the public who would like to speak during community forum, clearly state your name and city of residence before beginning your comments. If you are participating electronically, please use the raise hand icon, and when you are called upon, turn on your camera. If you are attending the meeting in person, please come forward to the podium when the chair invites speakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody in chambers that would like to speak? I'm not seeing anyone online. Is there anybody online? If you like to speak at community forum, just raise your electronic hand. I'm not seeing any. All right, with that, that'll bring us to the end of the workshop portion, and we're just going to move us into a closed meeting. So if you want to put up the resolution and then just get a motion to move it. Can I get a motion to move into closed? It's been moved by Councillor Schiller, seconded by Mayor Rumi. All those in favor? Opposed, carried. Great, thank you very much.